Kiev is currently facing a corruption scandal, which for many is seen as a crisis of confidence. At the same time, Ukraine is doing its best to stop Russian advances at the front line, namely in Donbass. To discuss these challenges, we are now joined by the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy. Prime Minister, thank you so much for making the time to meet with us. I would like to start off with the corruption scandal. First of all, is this, considering that the corruption scandal has reached the upper echelons of the Ukrainian political circles, is this seen is this evidence that the anti-corruption measures are working and they are able to eradicate some of this corruption, or to the contrary, considering that some of President Zelensky's closest advisors have been involved, it shows that corruption is very deeply rooted in the Ukrainian political scene?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And initially, you mentioned the word crisis. And you know, crises have two dimensions. On the one hand, it's a challenge, and corruption is a completely disgusting act in times of war. But on the other hand, crisis is an option and a chance. And let me remind you that it was my government in 2014 and 2016 that established a most efficient network of anti-corruption infrastructure. So we established a kind of big five: National Anti-Corruption Bureau, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, Special Anti-Corruption Court, National Agency for Preventing Corruption, and National Recovery Agency. So there is no other country in Europe that has this set of anti-corruption agencies. And in order to prevent corruption, my government passed special decisions in electronic procurement, in open data, and electronic declarations for the entire civil service in Ukraine. So my message to you is as follows. Corruption is completely unacceptable. But on the other hand, Ukrainian anti-corruption agencies started the biggest investigation against the high-profile Ukrainian officials. And these people will be brought to justice. So I do understand that those who want to deprive Ukraine of the further support will use this corruption case as an excuse. And I will never allow this, because you are not helping these corrupted officials. You are helping Ukrainian people and Ukrainian state to win this war. So help us to win the war. We will track down and we will eradicate corruption. And this kind of case is a clear example that nobody is above the law. Nobody.
And so in your assessment, is this the right time, as some voices have already signaled that a potential reshuffle in the government is in order? Do you think that this is the right time to do it, or do you think it potentially could be too destabilizing considering the frontline situation?
Look, here is the thing. So the president of Ukraine, he became the symbol of Ukraine's resistance. He embodied what Ukrainians have already done. Because we as Ukrainians showed to the entire world that we can fight against the armed-to-the-teeth Russia. And that Putin, who waged the war against Ukraine 11 years ago, failed in conquering Ukraine. So my second message is that we need to retain the legitimacy of the president of Ukraine. And now it's up to the president to decide where he stands. As of now, he has made the right decision to lead the process, to lead these anti-corruption endeavors. In terms of political stability, it is important to maintain this political stability. But the president has to convince the Ukrainian public that he is able to manage this situation and that he has drawn the lesson out of this situation. So it's up to him to decide whether he's ready to reshuffle the government or whatever. But it seems to me that a bold and sweeping actions are needed on his side.
And I would now like to return to the point that you touched upon, which is the ongoing support for Ukraine. Obviously, the EU is currently mulling this 140 billion loan to be financed from Russian frozen assets. There is some skepticism within some of the EU member states, considering the potential consequences on, for example, capital flight from Brussels, foreign capital flight from Brussels. What would be your message in order to convince European capitals that this loan is in order and it's necessary? And additionally, what do you think is the best way to guarantee that this money will be spent transparently?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had all these rumors and different kind of repercussions. What's going to happen to euro in case if the European Union decides to do what is needed? I mean, to provide the Russian assets as a collateral for the loan. My message would be as follows. Could you imagine what's going to happen with euro and the European Union and European security in case if Ukraine fails? Could you just realize the dreadful consequences for everyone living in the European Union? So you are not just helping us, I mean Europe, you're investing into your own security. And we are paying the highest price. This is the price of the human being, okay? So we are at the front lines. Put it in a nutshell. No doubt that Ukraine needs the financial support. The best way to provide this financial support is to use Russian sovereign assets as a collateral. There is no other option right now because, look, the European Union is facing a political turmoil too everywhere. For example, here in Germany with the rise of AfD and all these anti-European forces. So this is the best way to provide financial support to Ukraine and to invest into your own security. As giving this kind of loan to Ukraine, you're investing into your own security. There is a plan B, C, D, whatever, but we are running out of cash. Okay. And in this particular case, I believe that what is needed right now, and I met a number of Belgian officials, high-profile officials, a risk sharing is needed to give a strong and solid basement for the Belgian government to realize that they are not alone in case if, for example, Russians will go after them. And this is on the table, and Europeans can easily do it.
And how much of an appetite is there across European capitals? I mean, who do you imagine would bear this risk-sharing model for?
Look, that's not about appetite. That's about the very existence of the remnants of the international law and the very existence of the security of the European Union. There is just no other way rather than to support Ukraine to defend itself. In terms of legal grounds, there are plenty of different legal grounds. Why not just to use these Russian sovereign assets as a collateral, but actually to confiscate these assets? But as of now, there is a way forward, and I hope that the European Commission will bring everything that is needed to convince our Belgian friends that it's time to make the right historic decision.
And I would like to now turn to the frontline situation in Ukraine. About a month ago, I believe it was, that you said that it's very likely that Ukraine will win this war. Do you still think that, considering the ongoing energy crisis, the ongoing worsening situation when it comes to potentially morale on the ground, as well as the seeming territorial advancements that Russia has made in Zaporizhia and in Donbas regions, do you still think that it's likely to happen? Do you still think that the statement stands true?
Absolutely. So let's dig into the definition of what really to win the war means. For me, to win the war is actually to preserve the Ukrainian statehood and to provide an ironclad security for Ukrainians, security guarantees for Ukrainians, and in the future to make Ukraine an EU and NATO member. So is it doable? No doubt. But it all depends on the strong will of our European and American friends. So we are fighting against Russians for 11 years. And what Putin is achieving, yes, he has an incremental gains, that's true. He's crawling, that's true. And that's the reason why we need to get an additional ammo. And he is targeting Ukraine, and he believes that he can plunge Ukraine both in darkness and freeze. So in order to avoid this kind of dramatic case scenario, we urgently ask our Americans and German friends to provide Ukraine with Taurus missiles and Tomahawk missiles. So this is the best way to deter Russians and actually to hit the archer, not an arrow. We have to win this war. We can win this war. Because we have an enormous potential and capability. I mean, we as a free world. But what we are missing right now, political will and political guts. That's what is missing.
And if I may ask you then, so how would you define this victory? Would this be a return to the territories that Ukraine has held in 2014? Or would you think that there are any maximalist demands that Ukraine would be willing to potentially even consider that would be put on the table by Russia?
Look, as we are in Berlin right now, I will give you a historic example of Eastern and Western Germany. The time has come when Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And there is no wall in Berlin. And Germany is united. The time will come when Ukraine will restore its territorial integrity. But first we need to win this war and to provide the legal grounds for Ukraine to retake this territory with different means in the future.
And so when it actually comes to defeating Russia as a strategy, do you still think that this can be done on the front lines, or do you think it's now a question more of almost a waiting game and leveraging as much economic and diplomatic pressure in order to completely isolate Moscow from the rest of the world?
Well, there is no silver bullet, you know. If one believes that we can do it only on the front lines, that's the wrong strategy. It is a comprehensive plan to apply every possible and impossible pressure on Russians everywhere, starting with the economy. And I do commend the efforts, the latest statement of President Trump and Lindsey Graham and Senator Blumenthal, that they are ready to pass a secondary sanction package against Russians. So, as this is the war of attrition, this kind of war needs every single tool on the table. So we need to exert maximum pressure on Russians everywhere. So supporting Ukraine, imposing secondary sanctions, pressing on China, because this is a geopolitical conflict. This conflict has nothing to do just between Russia and Ukraine. This is more, much more. Russia is fighting against Ukraine and the free world. And who is behind Russia? China, North Korea, Iran, and another pariahs. So, and that's my message to the European audience and to the American audience. You are not just helping us. And they are not fighting just against us. They are fighting against you, your security, your sovereignty, your way of life, and your values.
I'm very happy that you touched on China, actually, and that will be my final question for today. Obviously, it's no secret that over the last couple of years, Europe has significantly strengthened its economic ties with Beijing. Do you think it's wise that Europe is now in a position where China, from behind the scenes, is seemingly supporting Russia's war efforts and it has its own vested interest in it, whilst at the same time Europe, which technically has learned the lessons from the past, from its proximity to Russia when it comes to economic and energy ties for the better part of the last 20 years or so, is now seeking the same types of relationships with China? Do you think it's wise?
Look what has happened. Okay, China is playing a hard ball against the European Union and against the United States. China actually hijacked a number of industries in the US and in the European Union. Even in some sense, you became hostages of China. And this actually hampers your security, your economy, and you are too dependent on China. On the other hand, China is a collaborator against Ukraine with Russia. It's an alliance of strategic partnership. And both war criminal Putin and President Xi are very clear that they are the strongest friends on earth. So my message would be as follows. The US and the European Union have to apply pressure on China. You have to de-risk, decouple, whatever. I like all these strange legal and political definitions. You have to be sovereign and you have to be independent out of China. Yes, you can make business, but they can not make you, let me put it this way. Play you and make you.
Prime Minister, thank you so much. I think the main message of today's interview is that maximum pressure against Russia and its allies and steadfast support for Ukraine remain imperative to Europe.
Ukraine can win.
And Ukraine can win.
Ukraine will win.
And Ukraine will win indeed. Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time.